The minivan was a time capsule of anticipation, filled with the scent of sunscreen and the crinkle of new road maps. For 12 months, the Silva family had existed in a state of suspended animation, their lives measured in school terms, project deadlines, and the slow, steady filling of a mason jar labeled Florida Fund on the kitchen counter. But now, finally, the waiting was over. The jar was empty, the bags were packed, and the open road was calling. For Marcos, this vacation was more than a trip. It was a necessary intervention. He was a man who had felt the walls of his life slowly closing in. The vibrant, adventurous woman he'd married, Isabella, had been slowly buried under an avalanche of pediatrician appointments, PTA meetings, and the endless, grinding logistics of running a household. Their 8-year-old son, Leo, once a bottomless well of wide-eyed curiosity, now seemed perpetually glued to a screen, his world narrowed to the glow of a tablet. And Marcos himself, a man who used to dream in wild, impossible colors, now dreamed in spreadsheets and quarterly reports. His soul felt dusty, his laughter a rusty, infrequent sound. This 2-week escape to the Gulf Coast was his meticulously planned counteroffensive against the slow creep of monotony. He had researched it for months. He knew the exact driving time to the minute, 14 hours and 27 minutes, not including stops. He had booked a quaint, family-run beachfront condo based on 347 verified positive reviews. Every activity was plotted on a color-coded spreadsheet. Monday, beach and dolphin watching tour. Tuesday, historical fort visit and famous ice cream parlor. Wednesday, nature preserve hike. It was a masterpiece of predictable, guaranteed fun. It was, he believed, the perfect recipe to reconnect his family, to scrape away the layers of daily life and find each other again. The first day of the drive was a symphony of pure, unadulterated joy. They sang along to terrible radio songs at the top of their lungs. They played I Spy until they ran out of things to spy. Leo, liberated from his digital leash, was a chatterbox pointing out every truck, every cloud shape, every state license plate. Isabella's hand rested on Marcos's knee, her smile easy and genuine, the worry lines around her eyes seeming to soften with every mile they put between themselves and home. They stopped at a classic roadside diner for lunch, eating greasy burgers and impossibly thick shakes, and it felt less like a meal and more like a sacrament to the gods of freedom. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, a deep, profound contentment settled over Marcos. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Leo, who was finally dozing off, his head lolling against the window, a stuffed dolphin tucked under his arm. He looked at Isabella, her face illuminated by the golden hour light, and he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, not just the partner he managed life with. "This is it, Izzy," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "This is what we needed." She smiled, squeezing his knee. "It's perfect, my love. You planned the perfect trip." He believed it. In that moment, hurtling down the interstate towards the promise of sun and sea, everything was exactly as it should be. The minivan was no longer just a vehicle. It was a vessel carrying them back to themselves, away from the demands of the world and towards the simple, pristine joy of being together. The vacation had begun, and it was every bit the picture-perfect escape he had envisioned. The future, for the first time in a long time, looked not like a series of obligations, but like an endless, sunny horizon. The second morning of the drive dawned bright and clear, the kind of optimistic weather that seems to promise a day without complications. They had crossed into Florida, and the air itself began to change, carrying a faint, salty humidity that whispered of the ocean still hours away. The excitement in the minivan was palpable, a tangible electric current. Even the landscape was transforming, the generic interstate greenery giving way to glimpses of swampland and towering, feathery palms. For Marcos, this was where his meticulous planning would truly pay off. He was in his element, the master navigator, the architect of their enjoyment. As they approached a critical juncture on the highway, a large green sign listed 2 options for reaching the coastal route: the continuation of the fast, wide interstate or the turnoff for State Road 19, a thinner blue line on the map labeled as a scenic route. Isabella, Leo, behold, he announced, his voice full of cheerful authority. The moment of decision. To our left, the boring, efficient, and, let's be honest, soulless interstate. It will get us to the condo in precisely 3 hours and 14 minutes. He paused for dramatic effect, pointing a finger to the right. And to our right, State Road 19, the path less traveled. It promises scenic vistas, historic towns, and local charm. It also, according to my calculations, adds approximately 1 hour and 7 minutes to our trip, not including potential delays behind slow-moving RVs or unexpected stops for, I don't know, homemade pecan pralines. He grinned, already knowing the choice. It was all part of the presentation. I say we push through on the interstate. We'll be unpacked in our swimsuits and dipping our toes in the Gulf with piña coladas in hand before we know it. We can explore the scenic routes later in the week, once we're settled. This is the logical choice, the smart choice. He expected a chorus of agreement. He had presented the facts clearly. Efficiency versus a delay. The payoff of the beach was so close, so immediate. The scenic route was a distraction, a detour from the perfect schedule he had crafted. In his mind, it was an unnecessary variable introduced into a beautifully solved equation. His plan was a straight, clean line to happiness, and he saw no reason to veer off course. The shortcut wasn't just about saving time. It was about executing the vision, about delivering the perfect vacation he had promised them. Every minute saved was a minute more of that perfect, planned bliss. The expected agreement did not come. Instead, a small, firm voice piped up from the back seat, cutting through the hum of the air conditioning. No! Marcos glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see Leo engrossed in his book or a game. But his son was sitting upright, his tablet forgotten in his lap. He was staring out the windshield, his small brow furrowed in an expression that was unusually serious for an 8-year-old. No, Dad? Leo repeated, his voice clearer now, laced with a conviction that was entirely new. We have to take the other road. The pretty one. Marcos chuckled, a soft, dismissive sound. Come on, champ. The pretty one is a long, slow drive. Don't you want to get to the beach? We can build a huge sandcastle before lunch. This had always worked before. The promise of immediate, tangible reward always won out over a vague, future alternative. But not today. Leo shook his head, his jaw set in a way that was eerily reminiscent of Isabella when she dug her heels in. I don't want to. I want to go on the other road. The one by the water. Isabella turned in her seat to look at him. Honey, Daddy's right. The interstate is faster. We're all tired of being in the car. The beach will be so much fun. No! The word was sharper this time, edged with a frustration that was tipping toward distress. He wasn't whining. He was insisting. It was a distinction every parent recognizes, and it made both Marcos and Isabella pause. We can't go that way. We have to go the pretty way. Please. Marcos felt a flicker of irritation. The perfect schedule was being challenged, and by a child's caprice. He was so close to delivering the flawless day he had planned. Leo, that doesn't make sense. Why? Give me one good reason. Leo's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, as if he were watching something they couldn't see. His small hands were clenched into fists on his knees. He struggled for the words, his face a mask of intense, childish concentration. It's too shiny, he finally said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The road is too shiny? Marcos asked, his irritation mingling with confusion. What does that mean, buddy? I don't know. Leo cried out, his composure breaking. A single tear of frustration escaped and traced a path down his cheek. It just is. It's bad shiny. The other road is better. It's safe. Please, Daddy. Please don't go that way. He was begging now, his earlier insistence replaced by a raw, genuine fear that was unsettling to witness. It was the same visceral, unexplainable terror that had gripped Pedro at the airport all those years ago. It was a plea that came from a place far deeper than a simple desire for a more interesting view. The exit for the interstate was half a mile away. The turnoff for State Road 19 was coming up even sooner. The minivan hurtled forward, a vessel on a collision course with a decision Marcos had never anticipated having to make. The minivan became a pressure cooker, the cheerful atmosphere of moments before evaporating into a tense, stifling silence. The exit signs loomed larger, demanding a decision. Marcos's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles bleaching white. "Leo, that's not a reason," Marcos said. His voice strained as he fought to keep the exasperation out of it. He was the adult. He was the logical one. He had to be. A road can't be bad shiny. That's just the sun. The interstate is wider, safer, and faster. It's the smart choice. He was pleading his case now, not to a child, but to the universe, to the sanctity of his well-laid plans. Isabella placed a calming hand on his arm. "Marcos," she said softly, her eyes flicking back to their son's distressed face in the mirror. "He's upset. I know he's upset, but we can't reroute our entire day because of a feeling." Marcos countered, his voice rising slightly. The perfect, color-coded spreadsheet was crumbling before his eyes, and it felt like a personal failure. "This is ridiculous. We have a schedule. We're losing daylight." "It's just an hour, honey," Isabella offered, trying to be the peacemaker. "Maybe he just senses we're all cooped up and wants a more interesting drive." "It's not that," Leo insisted from the back, his voice trembling but firm. He was crying in earnest now, fat tears rolling down his cheeks. "You don't understand. It's wrong. The shiny road is wrong." The argument was circular and utterly illogical. It was facts versus a phantom. Marcos's mind, so adept at solving complex problems with clear data, was short-circuiting. There was no data point for bad shiny. There was no column in his spreadsheet for child's premonition. The GPS's smooth, automated voice cut through the tension. "In 1,000 feet, keep right to continue on Interstate 10. The command was a lifeline to logic. It was the world agreeing with him. "In 500 feet, keep right." Marcos's indicator ticked on, the sound abnormally loud in the tense silence. Asterisk click click. Click click. Asterisk it was the sound of his decision. The sound of order. "No. Daddy, no." Leo's cry was a shriek of pure panic. He began to kick the back of his seat, not in a tantrum, but in a frantic, desperate attempt to stop what was happening. "Don't. Please. Leo, stop that right now," Marcos commanded, his own fear and frustration boiling over into anger. "Marcos, pull over," Isabella said, her voice suddenly sharp, her peacekeeping role abandoned. Her mother's intuition, a deeper and older force than any spreadsheet, had been activated by the raw terror in her son's voice. "What? We can't just stop on the highway. Pull over." Her tone left no room for argument. It was the voice that handled emergencies, that soothed night terrors, that knew when a fever was truly dangerous. With a grunt of exasperation, Marcos swerved the minivan onto the wide, dusty shoulder of the road, just yards before the exit ramp split away. Gravel crunched violently under the tires. The car jerked to a halt. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by Leo's ragged, hiccuping sobs. They were parked between two choices: the smooth, wide, shiny expanse of the interstate to their left, and the older, narrower off-ramp for State Road 19 to their right. The three of them sat in the stalled vehicle, the weight of the unresolved decision pressing down on them. The perfect vacation had just derailed, and they were stranded at the crossroads of a father's logic and a child's inexplicable, terrifying certainty. The minivan sat idling on the shoulder, a silent, metal island between two futures. The roar of passing cars vibrated through the chassis, each one a stark reminder of the efficient, planned journey continuing without them. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the sound of Leo's receding sobs, which had softened into exhausted, hitching breaths. Marcos kept his hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead at the relentless flow of traffic on the interstate. His jaw was clenched so tight it ached. Every fiber of his being, every instinct honed by years of responsibility and planning, screamed at him to put the car in drive, signal, and merge. It was the right choice. The sane choice. The exit was right there. He could still salvage his schedule. He saw it all slipping away. The early arrival, the effortless unpacking, the triumphant first run into the waves. It was being replaced by a slow, meandering drive, lost time, and the bitter taste of capitulation. He felt a hot flush of shame. He was the father. He was supposed to be in charge, to guide with wisdom and authority. And he was being defeated by a phrase as nonsensical as bad shiny. He caught Isabella's eye in the rearview mirror. She wasn't looking at him with anger or accusation. Instead, her gaze was steady, filled with a quiet, unwavering certainty that was somehow more powerful. She gently brushed the hair from Leo's damp forehead, her touch instantly calming him further. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was a question. Asterisk, what is more important, your plan or his peace? Asterisk. Marcos looked back at his son. Leo's big, brown eyes, red-rimmed and swimming with leftover tears, met his in the mirror. They held no malice, no triumph, only a residual, desperate fear, and a pleading hope that his father, his hero, would finally hear him. In that moment, the meticulously constructed dam of logic and reason broke. The image of another airport, another terrified child, another leap of faith that had defied all understanding, flashed in his mind. He had been given a second chance to listen before it was too late. A long, shuddering sigh escaped him. The fight drained out of his shoulders, leaving behind a weary, hollow feeling. He was wrong. He might be making a foolish, illogical mistake that would cost them an hour of beach time. But he would rather live with that minor regret than with the memory of the look of utter betrayal on his son's face if he ignored him. Without a word, he reached up and pushed the turn signal. Asterisk, click, click. Click, click. Asterisk. But this time, it pointed left, across the lane of traffic, toward the off-ramp for State Road 19. Okay, buddy, he said, his voice rough with surrendered emotion. He looked at Leo in the mirror and managed a small, tired smile. Okay, we'll take the pretty road. The effect was instantaneous. The remaining tension in Leo's small body vanished. He didn't cheer. He simply slumped back against his seat, a profound relief washing over his features, as if a terrible weight had been lifted. He gave a small, shaky nod. Thank you, Daddy. Isabella reached forward and squeezed Marcos's shoulder, her touch conveying a universe of gratitude and support. He put the minivan in drive, checked his blind spot, and pulled out onto the road. But instead of merging onto the wide, fast river of the interstate, he turned onto the older, narrower ramp. The change was immediate. The roaring speed of the highway was replaced by a quieter, slower world. The road was lined with ancient, sprawling live oaks draped in Spanish moss, their branches creating a dappled tunnel of light and shadow. The sound of the engine seemed louder here, a gentle hum instead of a frantic rush. Marcos's hands were still tight on the wheel, but the knot in his stomach had begun to loosen. He had done it. He had chosen his son's unexplained fear over his own impeccable logic. He had no idea why, and it still felt strangely like a defeat. But as he glanced in the mirror and saw Leo finally peaceful, looking out the window with calm curiosity, a small, unexpected feeling took root. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't certainty. It was the quiet, fragile peace that comes from choosing love over being right. The minivan settled into the slower rhythm of State Road 19. The initial silence inside the car was heavy, a mix of residual tension and tentative peace. Marcos drove, his eyes fixed on the winding two-lane road, a part of him still mentally calculating the lost time, the deviation from the plan. The scenery, he had to admit, was beautiful in a quiet, forgotten way. They passed through small, sun-bleached towns that seemed untouched by time. A clapboard post office, a diner with a flickering neon sign, stretches of dense, green forest broken by sudden, stunning vistas of sparkling blue inlets. Leo, now calm, had his face pressed to the window, watching the world go by. Isabella reached over and turned on the radio, finding a station playing soft, old-timey country music that fit the road perfectly. The tight knot in Marcos's chest began, slowly, to unravel. Maybe this was okay. Maybe it was even nice. They had been driving for about 45 minutes, lulled by the gentle curves and dappled light, when the forest on their right began to thin, opening up to a higher elevation that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the interstate highway system they had left behind. It ran parallel to them, about a mile away and several hundred feet below, a wide, multi-lane ribbon of concrete carving through the landscape. "Look, you can see the cars from here," Leo said, pointing. It was then that they saw it. A massive tanker truck, its silver body gleaming violently in the harsh Florida sun, was barreling down the interstate in the opposite lane, and weaving erratically between lanes ahead of it was a pickup truck, moving far too fast, swaying dangerously. "Idiots," Marcos muttered under his breath, a driver's automatic response to seeing reckless behavior on the road. He instinctively slowed their minivan, his eyes glued to the scene unfolding below them, a silent movie from a distance. It happened in a horrifying, slow-motion instant. The pickup truck, trying to overcorrect a swerve, veered sharply across the grassy median, its tires kicking up a spray of dirt and grass. It skidded, spinning, directly into the path of the oncoming tanker. There was no sound. From their vantage point, it was a morbid, silent ballet. The tanker driver slammed on his brakes. The trailer behind it began to jackknife, swinging around with terrifying, unstoppable momentum. The silver tanker slammed into the pickup truck with a force that was evident even from a mile away. The smaller vehicle was obliterated, swallowed whole. But the disaster didn't stop. The tanker, now completely out of control, rolled onto its side, skidding across multiple lanes of traffic in a shrieking shower of sparks. And then the world turned to fire. A colossal, orange fireball erupted, boiling upward into the sky with a silent, awful fury. It was followed by a dense, rolling cloud of black smoke that blotted out the sun. Within seconds, a chain reaction of secondary explosions began as cars, unable to stop, plowed into the inferno. The interstate became a vision of hell, a tangled, burning scar of metal and flame. Marcos slammed on the brakes, pulling their minivan onto the gravel shoulder. The three of them sat in stunned, paralyzed silence, staring at the catastrophe below. The only sound was the soft country music still playing absurdly from the radio. The shiny road, the bad shiny. Leo's words echoed in the silent car, no longer the nonsensical plea of a child, but a prophetic, terrifying warning. The shiny wasn't the sun. It was the blinding, horrific glare of the explosion. The glare he had somehow foreseen. They were supposed to be there, right there, in that exact stretch of hell. At that exact moment, they would have been one of those cars, trapped in the inevitable, horrific pile-up, unable to escape the fireball. Marcos's hand, still gripping the wheel, began to tremble violently. He looked from the apocalyptic scene below them to his son's pale, stunned face in the rearview mirror. He hadn't just chosen a scenic route. He had chosen life. Time ceased to have meaning. For a long, horrifying moment, the only movement was the column of black smoke, thick and oily, twisting into the pristine blue sky. The only sound was the incongruously cheerful twang of the country song on the radio, a grotesque soundtrack to the end of the world. Isabella was the first to move. Her hand, which had been resting on Marcos's arm, flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp that was more of a choked sob. Her eyes, wide with uncomprehending horror, were fixed on the burning highway below. She wasn't seeing a news story. She was seeing their grave. The minivan they should have been in was down there, somewhere in that molten tangle of steel. Marcos couldn't breathe. The air had been sucked from his lungs, from the car, from the entire universe. His knuckles were bone-white on the steering wheel, his entire body locked in a rigor of shock. His mind, the logical, analytical engine that had failed him just minutes before, now short-circuited completely. It could not process the scale of what he was seeing, the mathematical impossibility of their escape. The calculations, speed, distance, time, all led to one inescapable conclusion. They should be dead. He turned his head, a stiff, mechanical movement, and looked into the rearview mirror. Leo was silent. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was just staring, his small face a pale, blank mask. He understood. The bad shiny was no longer an abstract concept. It was a real, burning, terrifying thing. The nightmare he had felt in his soul was now painted across the sky. The spell was broken by the distant, faint wail of sirens, growing steadily louder. The sound pierced their stupor. Isabella fumbled for the radio dial and twisted it, silencing the cheerful music. The sudden quiet was even more profound, filled only by the approaching sirens and the frantic hammering of Marcos's own heart. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't just watch. With trembling hands, he put the minivan in drive and pulled back onto the empty scenic road. He drove slowly, mechanically, his eyes seeing the road but his mind seeing only fire. None of them spoke. What words could possibly fit into the void that had just opened up in their lives? They passed a scenic overlook a mile down the road. A few other cars had already pulled over, their occupants standing by the guardrail, pointing phones at the disaster, their faces etched with the morbid fascination of spectators. Marcos kept driving. He couldn't be a spectator. He was a ghost who had escaped the fire. The reality of their narrow escape began to settle in his gut, cold and heavy. It was a physical sickness. He thought of the argument, his frustration, his anger at Leo for challenging his perfect plan. A wave of nausea washed over him, so intense he had to pull over again, this time onto a dirt track leading into the woods. He put the van in park, yanked the keys from the ignition, and stumbled out into the quiet of the forest. He made it a few feet before he doubled over, bracing his hands on his knees, and vomited onto the pine needles. It was his body's violent, visceral rejection of the reality he had just narrowly avoided. He stayed there for a long time, breathing in the clean, pine-scented air, trying to erase the phantom smell of gasoline and smoke. He had never been closer to death, and he had been saved by the one thing he had almost dismissed entirely: the unexplainable, insistent fear of his child. The stunned silence was no longer just shock. It was the beginning of a terrifying, awe-filled reverence. The rest of the drive to the condo was a somber, silent procession. The vibrant energy that had filled the minivan was gone, replaced by a heavy, shell-shocked quiet. The scenic beauty of State Road 19 now felt like a backdrop to a tragedy, its charm forever stained by the column of black smoke they left in the rearview mirror. They arrived at the beachfront condo. It was exactly as advertised in the photos. Bright, airy, with a stunning view of the turquoise Gulf. But it felt like they were moving through a dream. The cheerful greeting from the condo manager felt alien. The act of carrying their bags inside, of unpacking swimsuits and sunscreen, felt surreal, almost disrespectful. How could they do something so normal when, just miles away, lives were being extinguished in a nightmare of fire and metal? Leo was withdrawn. He didn't ask to go to the beach. He didn't mention the sandcastle. He simply sat on the large living room sofa, clutching his stuffed dolphin, and stared out at the waves. His usual animated curiosity had been replaced by a deep, unsettling stillness. Isabella tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, her voice too bright as she put groceries away in the kitchen. But her hands were shaking. Marcos stood on the balcony, the salt air doing nothing to clear the phantom smell of smoke from his nostrils. His mind was a frantic, churning storm. The how and why circled like vultures. How had Leo known? How? It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a childish preference. It had been a desperate, visceral certainty. The phrase "bad shiny" echoed in his mind, now imbued with a horrific, specific meaning. He thought of every logical explanation. Had he subconsciously noticed the erratic pickup truck in the distance? No, it had been in the opposite lanes, coming toward them. He never would have seen it. Had they heard a news report about a reckless driver? The radio had been on his pre-selected music playlist until the moment of the crash. There was no rational cause, no data point, no observable fact that an 8-year-old boy could have processed to arrive at that level of terrified conviction. This was different from the airport years ago. That had been a dream, a vague feeling in the night. This had been a specific, immediate warning about a specific road. A warning issued with enough time for them to stop, to argue, to choose. Marcos walked back inside and sat next to Leo on the sofa. The boy didn't look at him. He just kept staring at the ocean. "Leo," Marcos said, his voice gentle, raspy. "Buddy." "Back in the car. How did you know?" Leo was silent for a long time. He squeezed his dolphin tighter. "I just did," he whispered, his voice small and tired. "Was it a feeling? Did you see something?" Another long pause. "It was too loud," he finally said. His brow furrowed as he struggled to find words for something that had no words. "But not with my ears. In my head. The shiny road was too loud and too tight. It hurt." He looked at his father then. His eyes filled with a confusion that mirrored Marcos's own. "This road is quiet." Marcos pulled his son into a fierce hug. There were no more questions. There were no answers to be had. His son hadn't processed information. He had sensed a wrongness in the fabric of reality itself. He had felt the scream of a future that was never meant to happen. The search for a logical explanation was over. It was a futile effort. He was left with only the staggering, humbling truth. His child possessed a knowing that defied every law of the rational world Marcos had built his life upon. It was a terrifying gift, and it had saved them all. The vacation was no longer about escape or relaxation. It had become a pilgrimage into the inexplicable, a journey to understand a mystery that he knew, deep down, he would never solve. The next few days passed in a blur of sun-drenched surrealism. They went through the motions of a vacation. They built the sandcastle. They swam in the shockingly blue water. They ate ice cream, but a pervasive, unspoken awe hung over them, a filter through which every experience was viewed. The world had tilted off its axis, and nothing would ever look the same again. For Marcos, the foundation of his identity had been shattered. He was a man who trusted steel and concrete, physics and mathematics. His entire life was a testament to the belief that the universe operated on knowable, predictable principles. If you calculated the load correctly, the bridge would stand. If you followed the map, you reached your destination. Cause and effect, action and reaction. This was the reliable, solid ground upon which he had built his existence. Now that ground was gone, replaced by a terrifying and wondrous quicksand. He watched Leo digging in the sand, completely absorbed in the simple task, and a chill would run down his spine. This small, innocent boy had access to reality Marcos couldn't even conceive of. He had seen a thread of time that wasn't meant to be pulled, and he had screamed a warning. How did that fit into a spreadsheet? How did you calculate the tensile strength of a premonition? His logic, his greatest asset, had become a useless relic. It was a compass that could not find north because north no longer existed in the way he understood it. The pride he had taken in his planning, his schedules, his control, it all felt foolish now. He had been playing a game of checkers while the universe was playing a game of multidimensional chess, and his 8-year-old son was the only one who could see the board. He found himself staring at the horizon, not seeing the beauty of the sunset, but seeing the infinite, terrifying possibilities. If time wasn't a straight line, what was it? If the future could be sensed, was it already written? Or had Leo's warning actually changed it? The philosophical weight of it was crushing. He thought of every time he had dismissed a gut feeling from Isabella, every time he had insisted on the most logical path. How many near misses had they already had that he was simply oblivious to? How many times had his stubborn reliance on data almost steered them into danger? The arrogance of it made him sick. One afternoon, as Leo napped and Isabella read on the balcony, Marcos sat alone in the living room. He opened his laptop and looked at the vacation spreadsheet. The color-coded cells, the precise timings, the optimized routes. It all looked so absurd now. A pathetic attempt to impose order on a chaos he was only just beginning to perceive. With a few clicks, he selected the entire spreadsheet and pressed delete. The screen went blank. It was a small, symbolic act, but it felt necessary. He was demolishing the old structure to make room for something new, something he didn't yet understand. He was no longer Marcos the engineer, the master planner. That man was gone, incinerated in a fireball on a highway he was never meant to be on. Who was left in his place was a mystery. He was a man humbled by the universe, awed by his own child, and staring into a vast, unknown reality with both terror and a newfound, trembling reverence. His worldview hadn't just been adjusted, it had been vaporized. He was starting from zero. Topic 10. The Eternal Bond. A newfound respect and a lesson in listening. The vacation ended not with the triumphant return Marcos had envisioned, but with a quiet, solemn journey home. The minivan was no longer a time capsule of anticipation, but a vessel carrying 3 people who had been fundamentally altered. The silence that accompanied them now was not tense or heavy, but contemplative, filled with the echoes of a miracle they could never fully explain. The return to their daily life was surreal. The familiar walls of their house seemed to hold a new secret. The routines felt different, not as chains of obligation, but as precious, fragile rituals. Marcos went back to work, but he was a changed man. He still engineered, he still calculated, but he did so with a new humility. He now understood that for all his expertise, there were forces at play, in the world and in his own home, that defied all calculation. The most profound change was in his relationship with Leo. The bond between them had been reforged in the fire of shared survival, but it was more than that. It was a bond of deep, unspoken respect. Marcos no longer saw his son as just a child to be guided and corrected. He saw him as a whole person, possessing a unique and profound connection to the world that he, as an adult, had been conditioned to ignore. He began to listen, truly listen, not just to Leo's words, but to the spaces between them. When Leo said he didn't want to go to a certain friend's house, Marcos didn't push. He asked gentle questions. When Leo felt suddenly sad for no reason, Marcos didn't offer a quick fix or a distraction. He simply sat with him, offering the quiet assurance that his feelings were valid, even if their origin was a mystery. He apologized for that day in the car. He knelt down, looked his son in the eye, and said, "I am so sorry I didn't listen to you right away. You were right. You were so brave to keep telling me even when I wasn't hearing you. Thank you for saving our family." Leo had just hugged him, a long, tight hug that said everything words could not. Isabella watched this transformation with a heart full of a quiet, powerful joy. The man she had married was still there, but he was softer, wiser, more present. The need to control had been replaced by a willingness to experience. Their marriage, already strong, found a new depth in this shared awe. One evening, months later, they were in the backyard. Marcos was pushing Leo on the swing, not watching the clock, not thinking about the emails he hadn't answered. He was just watching his son's face, alight with simple joy against the setting sun. Leo pumped his legs higher. "Dad?" he called out. "Yeah, champ. The swing feels good. It's the right kind of dizzy." Marcos didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't need one. He simply smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached his soul. "I'm glad, buddy." The plane that never landed had taught him about loss. The highway of fire had taught him about miracles. But this quiet moment in their backyard was the final lesson. It was about trust. It was about understanding that the most important maps are not drawn on paper, but felt in the heart. It was about realizing that a parent's job isn't to have all the answers, but to have the courage to follow the lead of a child who might just be listening to a song the rest of the world had forgotten how to hear. He had set out on vacation to find his family, and he had. But he had also found something else. A new way to navigate the world. Not with a spreadsheet, but with faith. Not with logic, but with love. And the unshakable knowledge that the most eternal bond is forged not in the easy times, but in the moment you choose to listen to a whisper, and in doing so, avoid the roar.